Shoot news. And this will be our second year anniversary show. We're gonna bring you another episode of The Awakening this week, episode 12, titled Wreck the Conception. A U.S. form of constitutional freedom survived the onslaught of authoritarian nationalism on the Unedited. As we've told you before, there'll be no resolutions in 2023. We'll have a massive awakening. The result, the resolutions in the future that will be beneficial for the whole human race. Just stay the course and remain confident and positive. Tonight, we're going to give you awakening to what the mainstream media and the self-serving investment brokers won't tell you in order for you to protect you, your family, and those you love. We're coming to you from Merrimack Valley, Massachusetts, where the shot heard around the world was fired. The conquered break. And it's Patriots Weekend. Monday will be Patriots Day. In Massachusetts, where the reenactments will be coming on the Lexington Green and then on the Green and then in Concord. So when that shot was fired, it changed the way the human race would be ruled or not be ruled by kings, queens, czars, emperors. So tonight, we're going to have an awakening for you to put everything that will be transpiring in the near future in perspective. And will aid you in making the correct choices. See, many things never change. The political pendulum, as we've told you, other series, it sways left to right, right to left. It goes back and forth until all your rights get rooted away. But today is tomorrow, and our state of civilization has reached the crossroads between liberty and tyranny. That's why this show is so important. I hope you share it with all your friends. And tonight's going to be a series of, this will be part one of a 6-part series. We're going to put the deception of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Their plan to take down the U.S. and replace the U.S. dollar with the world's global currency. There's a reason for that. We have some people cheering it on. But everything we've told you, my past shows are going to connect to you tonight. And I said, you need to know this. We have Marbury versus Madison, our Constitution. We have to oppose factions of our own government for we, the people, to survive. And the importance of that will spread worldwide. Right now, the rule of law is being severely compromised. There's a reason for that. It causes chaos and confusion. And by causing that chaos and confusion, it makes our nation, who is labeled as the leader of the free world, in fact it is, very vulnerable to foreign attacks from all different directions. Most nations don't even provide the citizens with the same protections we have. So this is all about. This is why it has to be protected at all costs. I mean, this is no joking matter. We're not trying to bum anybody out. We're just trying to prepare you so we can hopefully prevent this from taking place, what's being planned. That's going to need all of us united to take care of these problems. And saying that, don't fall for the hope of being sold. And carnival barkers, they're trying to chisel buck off you on social media, and even the people on the mainstream media. Most of them would love to tell you the truth, lay out the facts that we're laying for you tonight, but they have powers that control them. Some try to get out as much information as they can We usually use their clips, and we appreciate the try, but they're only a try. It's a limit. So, like I said, our future and the future of the freedom worldwide is in our hands and how we handle this. So we have to understand who they are, what they are, their plan, and share the knowledge with everyone. Well, listen, everything we use tonight is going to be used under fair use laws. So in our previous shows, we exposed you the effects of the Pandora Papers, how the manipulation of policies, and how abrupt the media cover-ups were, and how they've been altered. Because in 2019, clips, hopefully watched them, if reporters all over the world were digging in, following up with corruption and money laundering. And everything else. Like I said, these were big. And all of a sudden, everything went quiet. We hear nothing about the Pandora Papers. The coronavirus was released. It's the biggest thing that ever came up. Went silent. Is there a connection? Well, most likely. Because if you watch the parts that we played for you from the Pandora Papers, it just shows you how wealthy and powerful these people really are. That's something to seriously consider. The discovery of the Pandora Papers, like I said, united so many reporters. I showed you about the drug cartels in the first one, case to laundering money. And then in the second part that we did on the Pandora Papers, we exposed how Putin made himself quite a bit of money, Russian President Putin, right over to Ukraine. They exposed it all. It turned out the former KGB agent understood that the whole reason why the Soviet Union collapsed wasn't because it was defeated militarily. It was the Reagan administration discovered through the financial experts that the only way that communist nation was surviving was through its investments in the West. And what did the Reagan administration do? They cut off all their money flow from the West. Soon enough, the Soviet Union fell. The U.S. was given aid to the people because it wasn't the people, it was the communist form of government. It was the Soviet Union. Now, what we're seeing is the silence of the follow-ups on these stories that they promised were so hyped up. I mean, this science today exposes just how powerful the corruption is. And this is what we're facing. So this week, I said, we're going to connect the dots. Yeah, we're going to keep away from everything else. In this first segment, we're going to show you an explanation of exactly what BRICS is. It's to define our financial takedown and how they keep you occupied. Well, this is how the Roman Empire fell. It was also bread and circus, keeping people distracted from what was really going on. So, the USA, from the conclusion of World War II, has been in the position as a one nation, joined with its allies, as defenders of the free people of the world, unlike ever before. So our freedom is under attack right now, unlike ever before. Remember now, we have a state of technology now that we never had before in the human race. Keep in mind tonight, it was the main objective of the Communist Chinese Party is to prove to the world that freedoms are dangerous to the future of humanity. And people of the planet must accept authoritarian nationalism, with the Communist Chinese Party playing the dominant role. The BRICS financial system is based on the Communist Chinese yuan. It's beginning and is being promoted as an alternative to much of the corruption that occurs. But the question is it really? Is communism, after all its failures, a better alternative But history shows us that the brutality and destruction that the concept has implemented on the worldwide throughout history. That's the key. We have the history and what communism has resulted in. Its brutality and the millions and millions of lives it cost throughout time. So tonight, we're going to help you understand and expose the avenues of attack on our freedoms. Keep in mind, when we start out, this will be a basic explanation for those of you who don't quite understand. And even if you think you do, you might want to follow this first segment here. You have to understand the petrodollar. The term emerged when the U.S. agreed to offer armed protection to Saudi Arabia in exchange for oil purchases in 1945, I believe it was. But the purchases had to be only in U.S. dollars. Provided weaponry and military supplies and agreements involving the overall sale of oil in U.S. dollars. Saudi Arabia would recycle the surplus dollars into American economic system using U.S. Treasury bills. With that being said, let's roll that first clip.
The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar.
In 1945, the US President Franklin Roosevelt made an agreement of the century with the Saudi king, whereby the US guaranteed the security of Saudi Arabia, and in exchange, the Saudi king agreed to sell oil in US dollars.
For decades, world trade has been dominated by the dollar.
The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world.
The Monetary Authority of Singapore and the People's Bank of China have renewed the bilateral currency swap arrangement.
Saudi Arabia is in discussions with China to price some of its oil sales in yuan.
But as ties with Washington continue to be strained, Beijing and Moscow are diversifying.
China and Russia had taken another step closer towards dumping the dollar and agreed to trade in their respective national currencies, the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan.
Hey everyone, I'm Noah Zerbe. I'm a professor of political economy at California State Polytechnic University, Humboldt. I try to explain the concepts and theories behind current events, generally in 2 minutes or less. Most international oil sales are priced in US dollars regardless of the countries that are participating in the transaction. In 2020, for example, Saudi Arabia sold about $8.2 billion in oil to China and about $3.1 billion worth of oil to India. But rather than selling its oil in the rial, the national currency of Saudi Arabia, or in Chinese renminbi or Indian rupees, all of the transactions took place in US dollars. And this is true not just for Saudi Arabia, but for nearly every oil exporting country in the world, and it's generally been the case for about 50 years. Oil is the most widely traded commodity in the world, with nearly 100 million barrels sold per day. Projections are that more than $2.2 trillion worth of oil and natural gas will be sold in 2022. With oil prices currently hovering around $100 a barrel, this figure could move even higher. And almost all of those transactions take place in US dollars. Because countries who want to purchase oil must first purchase US dollars, oil sales generate additional demand for US currency beyond what might otherwise be the case. Such demand creates greater currency stability for the United States currency, and it also insulates the US economy from some forms of price inflation. It also generates significant additional demand for US Treasury bills, providing a steady stream of credit for the US government. There has been some pressure to move away from the petrodollar system. The Canadian dollar, the euro, the renminbi, and others have all been used to price oil in different countries. But the size of the global oil market creates challenges for smaller economies. In the 1970s, for example, the Netherlands suffered from dramatic currency appreciation, a sharp increase in the value of the currency due to pricing oil and natural gas in the North Sea in Dutch guilders. This made Dutch exports much less competitive on global markets, leading to a decline in the industrial base and service sector of the country, a phenomenon we now refer to as Dutch disease. As a result of this phenomenon, we'd expect that currencies like the euro or the renminbi would make more likely alternatives for the current petrodollar system, rather than smaller currencies like the Canadian dollar or the Russian ruble. So would a deal between Saudi Arabia and China be different? On its own, probably not. Saudi Arabia's annual oil sales to China amount to about $8.2 billion a year, but the US dollar accounts for about 80% of all foreign currency transactions worldwide, a total of about $6.6 trillion per day. Thus, I wouldn't expect the Saudi-China oil deal to have a dramatic impact in its own right on the petrodollar system. That said, if other countries begin following suit and making similar deals, effectively bypassing the dollar, that could have a larger impact. Over time, I wouldn't be surprised at all if global currency reserve systems began to diversify away from such extensive reliance on the US dollar. This trend has already begun, and a number of other currencies, including the euro, the Swiss franc, the British pound sterling, the Canadian dollar, and the Chinese renminbi, are already in use. I'd expect that trend to continue and perhaps even to intensify if the dollar becomes less stable as a store of value, that is, if it suffers from higher rates of inflation.
The US dollar dominates global trade. In 2019, some 88% of international transactions involved US dollars. No other currencies came close. That gives the US extraordinary power over nearly anyone who imports or exports anything anywhere. Commodities like oil, gold, and coffee are all priced in dollars, regardless of where they come from. But this clout has long frustrated America's rivals, making them vulnerable to US trade sanctions. Here's how the global economy runs on the US dollar, and why some countries are developing alternative systems that could chip away at the dollar's dominance.
The dollar came to dominate trade after World War II. The US was the biggest economy in the world. Other countries were trying to rebuild, and the dollar, it was stable and plentiful.
In 1944, a conference of 44 nations agreed to peg their currencies to the US dollar, while the dollar itself was pegged to gold. As global trade grew, so did the use of the dollar to conduct the world's business. Even after the United States abandoned the gold standard in 1971, the dollar remained the world's currency of choice.
The world has gotten used to doing business in dollars because it's just easier than doing business in any other currency. The dollar is incredibly liquid, meaning it's easy to buy and sell things all over the world. The US banking system is very efficient, and those things combine to make it cheaper for businesses to buy and sell in dollars.
Here's how a typical international transaction works in US dollars. A Canadian lumber company sells boards to a French home builder. The buyer's bank in France and the seller's bank in Canada settle the payment in dollars via correspondent banks in the United States. These correspondent banks have accounts at the United States Federal Reserve. The money is transferred seamlessly between these banks' Fed accounts because their status as correspondent banks means they are seen as safe counterparties. The United States says the use of these correspondent banks means every transaction technically touches US soil, giving it legal jurisdiction and compelling foreign countries to abide by its laws on money laundering and corruption.
After 9/11, the US used the power of the dollar to advance its foreign policy goals. The idea was to cut out the sources of funding for terror organizations.
The US used its control of the dollar to increase surveillance of global money flows and curb financing toward bad actors. It did this by imposing sanctions on its rivals. The United States is still exerting its influence in the Middle East through the power of the US dollar.
The dollar still dominates global trade.
If the power of the dollar falls, it could hurt the United States' ability to control the global trading system.
Please help explain the basics of BRICS, the basics of the petrodollar, and most importantly, what would happen if the US dollar falls from the US global trading currency. Our transactions were going through the US dollar. It made it more convenient for the world. The Chinese knew this. In that video, Professor Irby, it was made prior to the current assault by the BRICS nations. And now, what will be happening will be coming in with adding new nations to it. August will be their event. So, with that being said, the bottom line is dollars are just ink and paper, useless paper. It's the useful commodity that supports that dollar that gives it value. Keep that in mind as we go through these parts in the series, because it's the commodity factor that matters. And by the way, BRICS is a lot more since that video. I think they have probably close to a third or more of the economy, the global GDP. So Russia at that time had a weak economy. Now Russia's economy is thriving due to the petrol and the exporting of natural gas to these other countries that are buying it up in the East. You're not hearing all this in the mainstream media. For some reason, they don't want to tell us. And we're going to try to figure out why and show you why tonight. Once we get to the end game, you may understand. Goldman Sachs devised this whole plan, and that'll be explained at the very end. But 7 years ago, BRICS was moving up. Now they're playing the economic and geopolitical games, positioning their group. You'll understand more about why we can the minerals and the commodities that will give them the wealth that the U.S. dollar will not have if these nations choose BRICS over the U.S. dollar. You're going to understand a little bit more as you hear how they're coming after us.
Bizarre untruths.
Nature is angry, and we fool ourselves if we think we can fool nature, because nature always strikes back, and around the world, nature is striking back with fury. In May, I went to the island nation of Tuvalu, where I witnessed an entire country fighting for its very existence against the rising seas.
Lies, lies, and lies. In fact, an Auckland University study of Tuvalu found that over the past 4 decades, 3/4 of Tuvalu's islands actually grew. The total land area increased 3% nearly. And around the Pacific is exactly the same story. 43% of islands growing, another 43% of them stable. Not drowning, they're growing. But it's incredible the lies that I hear repeated almost daily by politicians and journalists and activists, people who should know better. And they tell these lies to children like Thunberg.
Why would they be doing this? Well, you're going to see now why. There's a lot of geopolitical games going on right now. And what these people are really after this? They're after this. Because this is what's standing in their way of complete domination. Look at it this way. Biden killed the U.S. economy. Under Trump, we were energy independent and becoming a dominant producer of oil and natural gas in the world, which made us the enemies of the tyrants. You know, why would any U.S. administration completely understanding the petrodollar? And in part 2, we're going to show you more about how they did and how this isn't new. You know, anybody fool you and say, well, gee, we didn't know this would happen. Bull. Okay, why would any of them, knowing the very essence of the importance of the petrodollar, want to push away from the petrodollar under false claims and lies? The people pushing this climate change thing are enemies of your freedom and freedom worldwide. Think of it this way. If the U.S. was backed by oil and gas, it was being produced in the U.S., and the U.S. principles would be almost invincible. and could withstand almost any attack on the U.S. and freedoms it was meant to stand for. No country, no international organization or group. Questionable motives like World Economic Forum, the UN, the Chinese-led BRICS nations could ever take the U.S. down. Since the U.S. is protecting freedoms and free nations across the world, under proper leadership, of course, then what are these people really going after? What are the leaders of these nations going after? Any nation that signs on with BRICS.
In 2001, Goldman Sachs predicted that a group of developing and newly industrialized countries could come to dominate Western economies. Since then, those countries have exploded in growth and changed the landscape of world politics. So what are BRICS countries? BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Those 5 countries comprise nearly half of the world's population, a quarter of the world's landmass, and a fifth of the world's GDP. Their combined GDP is nearly that of the United States and growing. A major aspect of their alliance is the formation of the New Development Bank to compete with the IMF and the World Bank. This gives them greater leeway to loan each other and other countries money for development unrestricted by Western influence. Estimates as to their rate of growth tend to vary. Some say that they'll overtake the G7 economies by 2027. Others suggest they might achieve that goal by 2050. This will largely be fueled by the rapid expansion of the middle class and higher GDP per capita. At the forefront is China. In 2013, they passed the $4 trillion mark in trade and passed the United States to become the largest trade country in the world. China's GDP could rival the US's by 2020, as it is already the second largest economy. India's expansion has led to the prosperity of the middle class in recent years. Part of this is due to the fact that 10 of the 30 fastest growing urban areas are located in India. Brazil, which is oil and iron rich, grew to become the 6th largest economy in the world in 2012, briefly overtaking the United Kingdom. However, Russia has seen economic difficulty and a declining population. Recent sanctions and geopolitical problems have increasingly isolated Russia from the rest of the BRICS. The final country, South Africa, was added to the group in 2010, despite having a significantly lower population and economy than any of the others. However, South Africa is the strongest African economy and provides a significant foothold on the continent for China and India. Despite their strong growth, many have said it will be unsustainable as resources are depleted. A growing population will rapidly deplete them and could sabotage the ability to grow at the same pace. Another critique is the overt dominance of China's economy. Without China, the BRICS would have little political clout, and this gives China veto power over BRICS issues. In fact, China's economy alone is larger than the rest of the BRICS combined. Additionally, all 5 countries have mixed records on human rights and ongoing conflicts with their neighboring countries. Regardless, the BRICS have seen significant growth in recent years. Even if they don't become the world's dominant economies, they'll still have far surpassed any expectations from the 20th century.
Hope you can get a grasp on it now. That clip was from, I believe, 7 years ago. And we chose that because it slowly will show you the progression as we go along with this series of what's been taking place. What's been taking place is being geopolitically surrounded by the communist Chinese, what now appears to be their allies. As you watch these next clips, you're going to understand more on how it's becoming a direct threat that can result in a takedown of the U.S.
Mexico, the second largest economy in South America after Brazil, has considered a possible partnership with the BRICS countries, being an important country for the group in several aspects. According to Andriy Serbin, Executive Director of CRIS and Counselor of the Argentine Council of International Relations, the main economic driving forces within BRICS are represented by the growing economies of China and India, and by the increasing coordination within the RICE, Russia, India, China group. Mexico is a strategic partner for these countries as it is geographically close to the United States and has a strong economic relationship with its neighbor to the north.
My name is Joe Biden. I'm Dr. Joe Biden's husband. And I ate Jenny's ice cream, chocolate chip. I came down because I heard there was chocolate chip ice cream. By the way, I have a whole refrigerator full upstairs. You think I'm kidding?
The Democrats are genius at a few things. They're horrible at foreign relations. They're horrible at policy. They're horrible at everything. They're good at a number of things, though. Misinformation or disinformation, depending on your definition, but both. They give misinformation. Look at what they said about Russia hoax. I watched Shifty Schiff getting up in Congress and repeating my conversation. That was totally wrong because I didn't tell him we had the phone call taped. So then I said, oh good, we'll sue him and we'll take him down. They said, you're not allowed to sue him because he's allowed to lie in the halls of Congress. So he got up and reported a totally fake conversation. But they go misinformation. Russia was misinformation or disinformation. The Times and the Washington Post, everybody has now discredited that. They said they made a mistake. Okay, that's fine.
I can't even say it strongly enough, is in complete shambles. We have 60% of our country now living paycheck to paycheck. CBS News now says 25% of people in our great country are what they call food insecure. Food that can't get bare necessities. Recession, record. Inflation, record. Our debt, our deficits. You know, why is this happen? How would you fix it? And would you have supported the bailout of Silicon Valley Bank?
Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
A lot of questions you're asking me.
I am.
I wouldn't have supported the bailout. The bank would have to get along by itself, and maybe they could have. What happened with the bank is interest rates went too high. And, you know, I had my own situation with Powell, and I beat the hell out of him. I was not a big fan of Powell. He was recommended by some people. I didn't like him. He's too interest rate happy. What you do is you get the oil prices down. That's bigger than interest rates, the only thing. And what happened is
let's take that apart before Trump explains. We have Mexico, a nation on the southern border of the United States, looking to join in with the BRICS countries. Mexico is rich in minerals. Well, you'll hear. So most of the show and all the clips you're going to listen to, the talk of oil, the petrodollar, the basis of the U.S. economy. We had to throw Joe Biden in because, well, this is what he was doing when there was a mass shooting at a Christian church. We now found out to be a transitioned youth who had many issues, and they refused to release his dossier, as he put it. He's a troubled human being. So we have to ask what's going on. Let's move on to this next clip where Trump explains some basic facts of leadership that we need right now because of what's transpiring and the importance of energy.
What happened is we took an oil and now we take an interest rates. Those banks failed because the interest rates were too high. They stupidly bought long-term treasuries.
10-year treasuries.
Well, they bought long-term, longer than that even. And they bought long-term, and those treasuries got crushed because Powell keeps raising interest rates. But that's up to Biden. He's going to have to worry about that himself. You know, in theory.
How would you fix it?
Well, I would have done a big number on Powell like it did. I did a very big number. In fact, he wasn't budging.
You wouldn't have given up
energy. He eventually cut him so much that it almost caused a problem. People said, how come he's cut him? He cut him almost a point immediately because he thought I was going to fire him, okay? Which some people said I had the right to do. Other people said, you don't. You know, when you put them there, rightfully they have to have some protection, et cetera, from a president.
But how much of this is...
But I thought he was hurting the economy.
You left this country for the first time in 75 years. We were energy independent.
Right.
A net exporter of energy. Right. Okay.
We were going to be dominant.
Okay. And Europe right now could have used American energy. This winter they could have used it. So, but now Joe has cut back dramatically on domestic production of energy. Now we're importing...
Not believable.
We're importing from Venezuela.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia last year, their big oil company, made the most money they've ever made in history.
That's right.
I think it was over $167 billion. How much of that, because doesn't energy impact trucking, it impacts the price of goods in every store that we go to?
So when Biden came in, the first thing he did was end the Keystone pipeline that I got approved. Okay, it was all approved.
Well, no, he also gave Putin a waiver on the Nord Stream 2.
Okay, so Putin said, because everyone said, oh, I'm so nice to Putin. Putin said, if you're my friend, I'd hate to see you as an enemy. He told me that. I got along very well with Putin. By the way, I'd be able to work that out. It would have never happened in a million years, and even the Democrats admit that. But if this thing isn't solved by the time we have the election, which is possible, it won't be. And there's also possible we'll be in World War III with these idiots that are doing what they're doing. You could end up in a nuclear world war, which will make World War I and World War II look like patty cakes, okay? This unbelievable, because we have people that don't know what they're doing. But if it's not solved, I will have it solved in 24 hours with Zelensky and with Putin. And there's a very easy negotiation to take place, but I don't want to tell you what it is because then I can't use that negotiation. It'll never work. But later on.
So you'd prefer, if you were president, you think you would have a negotiated settlement and
within 24 hours.
And we wouldn't no longer be ponying up all the money that, by the way, Western Europe is not doing their fair share.
What's unfair, and you and I have had this conversation, is that we're up to almost $150 billion, and Europe's at $24 billion. Now, it's the same thing with NATO.
How was that? Was it kind of enlightening compared to what you're seeing take place now? And what Trump just described. Using the petrodollar, what's going on with the war in Ukraine. Europe is hurting for energy. If the U.S. was a dominant source of energy, what would be happening right now? We would be able to help out allies in Europe and around the world. Would the banks be failing? No, he pretty much put a lot of pressure on Powell. Like he said, the Fed, whether it could find him or not, is debatable, but that's another story for another time. I think we've already covered the problems that we have with the Federal Reserve. So, the question there is Trump right? Everything we've seen take place is being done unintentionally due to bad policy? Or is it deliberately being done for another reason? We'll explain more in part 2. All the way to part 6, we'll show you the end game. But that will move to part 2.